Hola! I'm Barbara from the Caring Arts Foundation, and I love holidays. And you know, there's a really popular holiday coming up, especially with children, even big children, and it's Halloween. So we're all looking forward to that. But there's another holiday that's very popular in Mexico, and it's gaining in popularity here, and it's called Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. Only it's not a one-day holiday, it's a multiple-day holiday. It starts on October 31st, the same day as Halloween, and it goes to November 2nd, which is All Souls Day. The tradition celebrates and remembers people that we love that have passed on and honors them in different ways, especially by creating shrines and altars to them. So today I thought it'd be fun to create a mini shrine. Some people call it a shoebox shrine because you can use a shoebox to make it. But you don't need a shoebox. You do need a box of some kind though. So you can use something as large as a shoebox, which is a pretty good sized altar or shrine to make. I tend to like smaller boxes. This is a small gift box. This one might be a little bit too small, but it might be good for a pet because you can remember pets that have passed on as well. A couple years ago, or last year I think, I made a mini shrine from the top of a card box. This is what I created. This is my great-grandmother with her family in Bagheria, Sicily. And I've been there. I've actually visited her house there. So I created a shrine for her because I really liked this photo. But I never actually met her, so it's not terribly personal because I didn't know that much about her. So today I've decided to create a shrine for my mother. So there aren't a lot of things that you need, but you do need a photo of the person you are honoring. This is a photo of my mom that was taken when we visited Italy, and she was Italian, so I'm going to incorporate some Italian traditions in memory of her. I used some double stick tape to stick the photo to a piece of red cardstock, and then I happened to find some decorative scrapbooker's tape, which is sticky on the back, and I used that to create a gold border. And then I happen to have these crafter rhinestones that I'm going to glue, I think, around the frame. But you can use any decorative items you like if you want to create a frame for your photo, so be creative. But there are a few specific traditions to this holiday and this celebration, and I'm going to walk you through those, and then I'm going to adapt some of them for my shrine, and it'll be up to you to decide and figure out how to adapt them for yours as well. So the first one is what I started with, a calavera, which is actually a sugar skull. Now this is probably the most recognizable symbol of Day of the Dead. Normally for the altars, they're made of sugar and then painted to look like this and then placed on the altar. I'm going to use sugar in a different way for mine. My mother liked these candies that are from Italy. They're hard on the outside and soft on the inside, and they're a traditional Italian sweet. So for my sugar, instead of the calavera, I'm going to incorporate some of these. Then marigolds are a very important tradition for Day of the Dead. I actually happened to take a walk today and saw some in bloom and picked one. They have a very strong odor, and that smell is intended to attract the spirit back to earth for this celebration. So marigolds is an important element, but instead of using real ones, which is typical in Mexico, I'm going to show you how to create tissue paper marigolds, or little flowers that kind of look like marigolds. So we're going to do that. It's very simple, but you will need some tissue paper for that. And then another important tradition for Day of the Dead is papel picado, which basically means perforated paper. They're kind of like snowflakes, but they're square. And each one is usually made from a different color. If you're using a shoebox, these fit perfectly to incorporate into a shoebox design. I'm actually going to show you how to make these in a separate video. Because I'm not going to use these in my design. I'm going to do something a little bit different, but it's the same idea. So you'll start to get the idea that there's a variety of ways that you can adapt some of these traditions. And then some of the other things that are often used in the Day of the Dead altars. One of them is pan de muerto, which is bread of the dead. And typically loaves are baked in the shape of a skull or bones, and they're placed on the altar. And basically those are just to have something for the spirit to eat. Now, what I really like is the tradition of using items that the person who's passed on liked to eat. Instead of bread, my mother was Italian, so for my altar, I actually got some pasta, and I cut it down into a smaller size and tied it with a little twine, and I'm going to incorporate that into my shrine. And then the last couple things that you need, salt is an important element in shrines. I'm just going to use some Morton salt, and I found these votive candles. Now, I am going to use some votive candles at the end in my altar, but I'm not going to use these real ones. I'm going to use the little LED ones. But what's cool about these real votive candles is they have this little holder, and it makes a nice little container. Sometimes they're plastic and sometimes they're metal like this. So I'm actually going to pour salt into this and incorporate that into my altar. Normally, salt is laid out in the shape of a cross, and it's intended to purify the spirit as it visits us. And then the last thing we need is something for the spirit to drink. Often water is incorporated. Now, my mother was Italian, so she drank wine. So I'm going to add a little wine to my altar, and I'm going to use these little med cups. Now, my mom had breast cancer, and she was very familiar with med cups, and I'm sure she would have preferred to drink wine rather than whatever else she had to take. But I'm going to use these little med cups for to hold the wine. So in addition to a box, the things you're going to need are scissors, perhaps a pencil, some craft paint might be useful. You will need some colorful paper and perhaps some pattern craft paper. I used also some wrapping paper I think I'm going to use on mine. You're going to need some colorful tissue paper, and hopefully you have some of that. You can even take it out of a gift box or something. But if you have a couple of different colors, that would be good. Perhaps a pipe cleaner or a twist tie or a couple of those would be a good idea, because we're going to make some tissue paper flowers. You want to find meaningful mementos as well to add. Everything I'm using today, actually, I found here in my house. So just running around the house, I pulled all these things together. You're probably going to need some glue and maybe a selection of colored magic markers might be helpful, or any other odds and ends. The main thing you need, of course, is a box. Now, I decided I liked the shape of this particular box. It had this flap on it, and I cut that off. So I didn't think it was necessary to have that. And I happened to be painting the other day. I was painting a room, and I liked this green color. So I just went ahead and took the paint and one of these foam brushes. It's not really a brush, just a piece of foam. And I painted the inside of my box just to give a nice color on the inside. Now, I actually chose my color palette because when I was looking around, looking for items that reminded me of my mother, I happened to come across this little piece of ribbon. And this ribbon jumped out at me because it reminded me that her living room was these colors, this orange and green and this dark red color. So it made me think of her. So I've decided to make use of that as my color palette. So I'm going to use a lot of these colors here. And then I happened to see this piece of wrapping paper. And it also made me think of her, not only because it had many of the same colors, but my mother was very into gardening, and she liked to garden. So this is going to be a garden that's going to go at the front end of my box. So to create that, I'm going to flip it over, and align the flat of the box on top of the back of the paper. And then I'm going to grab my pencil and trace around that. And then I'll just cut that out so it fits perfectly onto the flap of the box. Now next for my papel picado, I'm not actually going to use the little squares that I showed you earlier. My mother liked to do needlepoint, and her mother created doilies, and she crocheted and did embroidery. And so I came across these little doilies, these paper doilies, and I decided to incorporate those instead. Now, they are certainly papel picado. They have perforations, so they serve the same purpose. So I'm going to take one and fold it and cut it in half. And then I'm going to incorporate these into my design. So my garden wrapping paper fits very nicely, and that looks pretty, but the rest of my box doesn't look so good. So I found some scrapbooking paper that's green, and I used the box as a template in the same way, and I cut a piece for the top, and then I cut one for the side, and then I used that as a template to cut a piece for the other side. But before I glue all of that down, I'm going to take my paper doilies and fold over the cut edge, and I'll place that onto the box and either glue or tape that down, and then I'll glue the rest of the paper on top of that, so everything looks very nice. The next thing we want to do is to make our little paper marigolds. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really very easy, and they're so pretty when they're done. And all you need is some squares of tissue paper. Maybe 2 or 3 colors is good. I like to use bright colors that are similar to marigolds, but really you can use any colors at all. But they all have to be kind of the same size, so you need to cut a square of 3 colors or 2 colors, whatever you're using, that are the same size. So I'm first going to kind of square them off. They're not really going to be exactly square. They're going to be a rectangle, and I've got my 3 colors here, and I'll show you how to square those off. So we're going to take our pieces of tissue paper, and you will want to line the ends as best you can. And you grab the left side of the paper and fold it up into a triangle so that the edges align at the top. And then the pieces on the right side, you're going to cut those off. That's the excess. And then that's going to give you a square, and they'll all be the same size. You probably want to end up with a square that's about 3 or 4 inches. And then you fold up the bottom edge, and you're going to keep folding back and forth into accordion pleats. Pleats will be about maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch, and just keep going back and forth, keeping them together as best you can. They don't need to be perfect. And then you're going to want to grab a piece of pipe cleaner, or perhaps a twist tie, whatever you have, even a piece of wire would be fine. And you're going to wrap that right around the middle and twist that together so that it's tight. And then we're going to start opening it up by separating the pieces of tissue paper. Now you want to be very careful when you do this because it does rip very easily. It's fragile paper. And you want to pull it down as far as you can in the center without ripping it. Now if you rip a little piece, don't worry, just keep going. And when you fold that up, you probably won't see it. But try not to rip it. And then you do the other side. And then just keep pulling them apart as far as you can. And then when we're done, you just fluff that all out and push it together. You can tighten it up in the middle if you like. It'll look a little more like a marigold then. And if they're not exactly marigold colors, you can make these any color you want. So I'm making them to match the rest of my project. And then I happen to find these silk leaves in a drawer somewhere, and they have a twist tie, so I'm going to tie one of those on there. But it's just something I found. You can cut leaves if you want leaves on it from construction paper or some kind of bright colored craft paper. Just cut a big leaf shape, any shape you like, that looks like a leaf. And then you can just glue that on if you want, but you don't really have to have a leaf. And then marigolds have kind of frilly leaves, so if you want to cut into that to make them a little more frilly, you can do that, and then you just kind of bend up the ends. But really, you can do this any way you want. These are your flowers, so they should look the way you want them to look. And then you can even take a Sharpie marker and draw some veins onto the leaves just to make them look a little more real, and then just glue them on. So now we have our little marigolds, and I'm going to glue those into the box in a minute. But before we do that, I needed something else to represent my mom, and she was a singer. And of course, I had to have something that represented music. So I found an old piece of sheet music, and I cut out a square from that, kind of a rectangle actually, and I'm going to turn that into a little scroll. To create a scroll, I'm going to take the piece of sheet music that I cut out, and I'm going to grab my pencil, and I'm going to put it at the bottom of edge of the paper and roll that up. And then I'm going to turn it around and grab the opposite corner of the paper, and I'm going to roll that around the pencil as well, and that's going to give me a little scroll. So the last couple of items, I'm going to set that aside, are going to be the salt and the sugar, which represent purification and the sweetness of life. So I'm going to make use of a real votive candle. I'm going to take those out actually and just use the little holders. So I think rather than leave these plain, I'd like to decorate them in some way. So I think I'm going to take my Sharpie marker and I'm going to draw little designs onto them. You could use craft paint just as well, or you could even glue sequins onto them. There's any number of ways to decorate them. But I'm going to use Sharpie marker and decorate each of them. And then I'll fill one with salt and the other with these little Italian candies that will be in place of my calavera. And then I will incorporate them into the final altar. So now my box is ready, and all we have to do are add all the elements and then glue them in. So first, the photo of my mother. The pasta, I decided to add a spool of thread since my mother did needlework. The music, the flowers, the sweets, the salt, and then after I glue all those in, we'll add the wine and the votive candles. Oh, and of course, what inspired my colors, a bow on top. Salute to you, Mama.